Good morning. This video is for people that are absent or those people that are quarantined due to exposure of COVID-19. So today in class, we're going to start taking our first few slides of notes over Unit 5. Unit 5 is entitled Launching the United States. And during this unit, we're going to focus on the first three presidents, George Washington, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. And while we cover those three individuals, we're going to look at major events that are going to unfold while they are president. So as you watch the lecture today, make sure you pause the video if I'm moving too quickly and copy down everything that you see on the screen. The first United States president. So most people, especially those of the founding fathers and other members of the Constitutional Convention, all believe George Washington should be the first president of the United States. The reason why they believe he should be the first president is because he has all the characteristic traits that the delegates at the Constitutional Convention desired in a leader. He's patient, he thinks things through, and he can get along with almost everybody. Unfortunately, some of the founding fathers are going to have to try their best to persuade George Washington to run for president. He felt that he's already done so much for the nation that it's time for him to retire and go back to his family farm or plantation of Mount Vernon inside the wonderful state of Virginia. If you're ever able to go on the DC trip here provided by the school, you are lucky enough to attend Mount Vernon. You have the opportunity to walk the property. You go in of his house, check out all of his rooms. You make your way down to the burial site of George Washington, and you also walk through a slave graveyard that is located within the property. It is a very interesting place to go. It's eye-opening to see kind of what life was like during that time. And you get to also go to a museum that is all about George Washington. They have great exhibits and a really awesome show or video they show you guys kind of about the life of George Washington. So the election of 1788 and 1789 takes place in the month of December of 1788, and it continues until January. So the founding fathers were able to persuade George Washington to not retire just yet, but to put his name on the ballot to become the first president of the United States. We're only going to have 10 of the 13 states to actually cast their votes for president. The reason why not all 13 states are voting is because two of them, North Carolina and Rhode Island, have not ratified the Constitution. If your state has not ratified the Constitution, you're not really seen as a state of the United States, and you do not have a say in regards to the federal government or a presidential election. The third state, which was New York, did not find a way to elect or choose their electors because of internal disputes. So we're going to have 10 states who are going to be responsible for selecting electors to vote for the first president. So we are not going to see the American people cast their vote in 1788 or 1789. On the board, you can now see the voting in regards to how many electoral votes went to George Washington. There are other grayed out states in regards to those who are not voting in this election. We can also see the amounts of votes that all of these delegates are going to receive. The most important three individuals is George Washington, John Adams, and John Jay. We talked about John Jay previously when we looked at Jay's treaty, as we completed a worksheet about the important people of Unit 5 from the previous week. These electors are going to form the first ever electoral college. These individuals were responsible for representing the people's vote in choosing the actual president. The electors had an obligation to cast two votes, one vote for one candidate, the second vote for a different. As we can see, just looking at this board, we see that George Washington is going to sweep the Electoral College, in which he is going to receive 69 electoral votes. In second, we have Mr. John Adams, and in third, we have John Jay. George Washington wins the first election by sweeping all 69 electoral votes to become the first president of the United States. During this time, the person that gets the most amount of electoral votes will become president. The individual that gets the second most will become vice president. So thinking back to what I just explained on that previous slide, John Adams is going to receive the second most votes, so he will become the first vice president of the United States. This type of voting is going to cause issues down the road when we get to the election of 1800, when there is not only a presidential tie, but there are two different political parties that occupy the president and the vice president role in the executive branch, which is eventually going to turn into problems between the executive branch. Not only do we have our first president and our first vice president, we also have our first lady. The first lady is Martha Washington, Washington's wife. The role of the first lady has really changed and adapted throughout time. Really, for Martha Washington, her job was to entertain guests, attend state dinners, attend social events, all on the side of George Washington. Throughout time, we're going to see the role of the First Lady kind of advance into a more political agenda. For example, when we get to John Adams, we'll focus on Abigail Adams and her role she played in the Republican motherhood, which kind of used it as a voice for women to kind of get women more involved in the federal and state governments. Looking at previous First Ladies, we looked at Michelle Obama, who focused on childhood obesity. Ms. Trump focused on cyberbullying and harassing. And the new First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, is going to focus on education, since she is a college professor and then working with military families. Congress decides that they were going to create different departments inside the executive branch. These departments are also referred to as cabinets. These leaders of departments are going to be experts in regards to the arena that they are going to be advising the president. George Washington took his sweet time to figure out the perfect members to fill out his cabinet. It takes him roughly 4 months into his presidency to nominate his first individual in some of his openings of his cabinet. Nowadays, presidents that are elected before they're really inaugurated have an idea as to who they want to fill these certain cabinets. So it makes for a smoother transition between presidencies if the president-elect has their cabinet already planned, which could speed up the process as those members are going to have to be approved by Congress. So underneath George Washington's cabinet, we're only going to have 4 major departments. This is all going to change as we can kind of continue out throughout history. So the first nominee that he selects is Alexander Hamilton. He wants him to serve as the Secretary of Treasury. A lot of these individuals are hesitant to take on a cabinet position. One is because maybe lack of pay. The other is because they are enjoying what they're doing prior to being nominated by the president. So Alexander Hamilton has had a head for economics. He started his formal education very young in New York City. He formed kind of a volunteer militia, and he served in the American Revolution with George Washington. So those two guys kind of get along quite well. The second individual is Thomas Jefferson. His role is going to be the Secretary of State. So even though the president is known as our leader in foreign affairs, he can't tend to it on a daily basis. So the Secretary of State is going to be our leader in regards to foreign affairs. Thomas Jefferson was kind of hesitant on taking on the responsibility to become Secretary of State for the prime reason that he was enjoying his role as being a minister to France in regards of forming relations between the United States and France. These two individuals are not going to get along very well throughout their time as serving in Washington's cabinet, mostly because they have two different beliefs in regards to how the government should function. So Alexander Hamilton was one of the leaders of the Federalist movement, in regards to believing in a strong national government and supporting the idea of the ratification of the Constitution. He shares similar ideas as George Washington, since George Washington also agreed that the Articles of Confederation were too weak and we had to do something to make the federal government a little bit more stronger. On the opposite side, we have Thomas Jefferson, who's kind of in that party of anti-federalists. He doesn't believe in a strong national government. He wants the national government to be extremely weak in order to protect state rights. So we're seeing the ideologies of two different individuals who are going to hold a very predominant role inside the executive branch, who have two different ideas. So their relationship as they work with George Washington is going to be tested. Eventually, there's going to be conflicts within the cabinet, which will result in one of these two individuals resigning from their position and setting their eyes for the presidency. The third out of four is the Secretary of War, and that is Henry Knox. Henry Knox was one of George Washington's generals during the American Revolution, so he understands the capabilities of Henry Knox. The main idea for Secretary of War is to lead war efforts, but also to protect the United States from potential invasion. We won't really talk much about Henry Knox just in regards to the fact that he was the Secretary of War, and we will highlight some key battles in which the U.S. military is going to have to fight to protect its interests at home. The fourth is Mr. Samuel Osgood, and he takes on the Postmaster General. The idea is that he is going to be our leader in regards to the United States Postal Service, in regards of delivering mail to the American people. His job will be to oversee the day-to-day functions of the United States Postal Service. So not that important in regards to the other ones that we have covered. So during Washington's presidency, we've only had 4 cabinets, but today we're up to 15. We still have the same ones stated by George Washington, but others have adapted and grown. For instance, we have the Secretary of Education, we have the Secretary of Homeland Security, Urban Development, small business. A lot of these different cabinets are something that we don't really think about in a day-to-day thought, but it has a extreme kind of burden on the executive branch. Last 2 slides. So when we talked about the Constitution, there's 3 major articles in which Article 1 is Congress, Article 2 is the executive branch, and Article 3 is the judicial. So when the Constitution was crafted and was ratified, the only thing it really had stated was that they were going to form a Supreme Court, which would be the highest ranking court in the United States. But that's pretty much it. So there was no actual federal court system in regards to hearing court cases that deal with federal law. So the Judiciary Act of 1789 is going to create our 3-level of federal court systems. Number 1, or at the highest level, is the United States Supreme Court, which today is made up of 9 Supreme Court justices, all nominated by presidents once a vacancy has opened. The Supreme Court is not going to hear a lot of cases throughout a calendar year. They may hear roughly 100 to 150 Supreme Court cases, really focusing on the idea as to whether or not an individual's Constitution amendment has been infringed upon. Below the United States Supreme Court, we have a district of circuit courts of appeals. Before I explain that, I'm going to show you this map here on the board. So these individual areas of which we have numbers 1, 2, 3, all design different regions throughout the United States. And if you are going to appeal a decision, you are going to have to appeal it within a circuit judge in your area. So as we can see, most of the state of Illinois is in District 7, but close to the east side or closer to the Missouri border, we are going to be then put into the District 8. Before court cases can make their way up to the courts of appeals and make their final stop to the Supreme Court case, they are going to have to be heard inside of these federal district courts. So within these district courts, that's where the cases are going to start to be heard. About 80% of the court cases that are heard at the district courts level are going to be stopping there. But for any reason, these individuals have the opportunity to appeal the decision, and they can take it up to the courts of appeals. If they are still not satisfied with the ruling by the courts of appeals, they can file a petition for their case to be heard at the U.S. Supreme. A lot of the cases are not going to go above 3, but if they do, they'll only stop at level 2 of the courts of appeals. The final slide for today is going to focus on an important street in New York called Wall Street. Wall Street has had a very interesting history. At first, it was a dividing line between the American colonies and the Dutch who occupied New York before it became a colony. It's going to be the scene of slave trading. It's the street in which the Federal Hall building is located at, which was the location of our first capital. But most importantly, we are going to see an economic powerhouse form on Wall Street. So during the 1780s, 1790s, we're going to have 24 stockbrokers who are going to meet almost daily underneath the Buttonwood tree on Wall Street. Their goal was to exchange stocks in regards to different businesses and be able to do so without the government becoming involved. They signed an agreement underneath the tree one day that is going to allow them to form up what we know as the New York Stock Exchange. The New York Stock Exchange is the world's busiest and wealthiest stock exchange in the world. It's free from the federal government, in which individuals are able to participate in kind of this capitalism market, a free market in which individuals can invest or invest into different businesses throughout the United States. So our lecture today focused on the first president, the election of George Washington, the formation of cabinets, and then the formation of the judicial branch in the New York Stock Exchange. These are your notes for tomorrow. Check back on Schoology on Tuesday to see what other work you have to do. Have a great day.